Wasabi guys, Void here, come back at you with another deck tech video. This time we're going to be doing something for one of my awesome patrons, Ugamon. He requested a Queen Marchesa deck tech, and I absolutely love her. I think she's very fun, very unique for Mardu colors. If you are curious about my Patreon, just check it out. The link will be in the description below. If you feel like doing something like Ugamon, I could definitely have that arranged. We can do a deck tech, do a top 10 of your choice. So if you don't know what Queen Marchesa does, she is a 3/3 for 4 mana with Death Touch and Haste. She's a human assassin, and whenever she enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. I will get to the whole Monarch keyword, and I'll get to the mechanic in a minute. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent is the Monarch, you get to put a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch and Haste onto the battlefield. So right here, this works out pretty well. So if you're the Monarch, you don't really have to worry about it, but if someone else is the Monarch, you get to have a little assassin go after them with Death Touch, so it's kind of going to incentivize them to just not block and take the 1 damage, so that you can then become the Monarch again. So what the Monarch mechanic basically is, it's almost like an emblem. However, it's not from a Planeswalker. You get it whenever Marchesa enters the battlefield, and there's just a ton of other cards that interact with the Monarch keyword. So you have the Monarchy basically whenever cards like Queen Marchesa enter the battlefield. And at the beginning of your end step, you get to draw a card if you are the Monarch. Your opponents don't get to, so that is the incentive for them to attack you. However, if an opponent is able to deal combat damage to you, then they become the Monarch. So all this essentially is just a little beginning of the end step draw. That's the whole incentive of this game, and it's such a unique strategy because it impacts a game unlike a lot of other cards in this format, unlike a lot of other commanders. We don't really see this anywhere else. Basically, whenever the Monarchy starts, it's going to keep going on for the rest of the game. You can't really get rid of it. It's like an emblem in that sense. They can't destroy it, they can't exile it, they can't interact with it except for becoming the Monarch, gaining the whole beginning of the end step draw. So that's the really only thing that they can interact with it, is just gaining control of it basically. But yeah, it's a very cool mechanic, very simple, but yet it's all about control, and this is what the deck is basically going to be. It's about dissuading your opponents from attacking you, keeping that extra card draw. It's very underrated getting this type of card draw for the entirety of the game, and if you're able to maintain that control of the Monarchy, you pretty much can just draw twice as many cards as you normally would. And this is in addition to your other card draw, so very unique. And if you happen to lose it, then you get the 1/1 black assassin at the beginning of your upkeep, and it has haste, so you have a way to just punish your opponents for attacking you, punish them for really screwing you over at any point in this game. And that's what I love about her. So let's get into the lands. We just want some utility lands here just to go over. We already know we're going to be playing Sacred Foundries, your typical dual lands, mana fixing, but we play Arcane Lighthouse because there's a ton of control in here. There's a ton of targeted removal. We want to make it to where if our opponents have hexproof shroud creatures, we want to get rid of that and be able to deal with them straight up. Maze of Ith, perfect land for this type of deck. It's all about Pillow Fort. Removing a creature from combat, it's going to save us so many times. And then we have Throne of the High City, something that you could take out if you're desperate for more mana fixing, or if you have more expensive lands to choose from. But it is kind of cool if we have another way to get the Monarch trigger. Getting it by sacrificing this land isn't terrible. It's not optimal, so if there is something I would take out in the land base, it would probably be this card, but it's not terrible. Then we have artifacts. We have your typical Soul Ring, Thought Vessel. We're drawing a ton of cards. May not seem like it, but we're getting that extra card draw at our end step. That's not always good just to hold on to that. It is technically at the beginning of your end step, so you will have to eventually discard if you have over your max hand size. Felwar Stone for mana fixing. Boros Signet, Orzhov Signet, Rakdos Signet for the same exact reason. Commander Sphere, same reason, but it can also sacrifice itself to draw you a card. Sensei's Divining Top is good top deck manipulation, one of the best cards in the whole format. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, not always a priority to keep Queen Marchesa protected. I know the deck is basically called Protect the Queen, but it's more or less just protecting ourselves. Like, we're the queen, we're the Monarch, essentially. That's what the whole purpose of the deck is. So we want to protect all of our creatures if we can help it. We want to protect ourselves, so protecting our creatures is kind of the best way to do that as well. So giving them hexproof and shroud isn't terrible. And we have Crawl Space because limiting the amount of creatures that can attack us may not seem that amazing, but just 2 creatures attacking us, the new vampire deck that has a ton of vampires that can all swing at you with all these anthems and gigantic vampires, yeah, you only want to have to deal with 2 of those. That's still better than dealing with a whole team. Norn's Annex. We're going to have a ton of these enchantment artifact cards that are going to do a very similar thing. Basically, we're going to tax our opponents each time they want to attack us for each creature. In this case, it is basically they have to pay Phyrexian white mana here, so they either have to pay 2 life for each attacking creature or 1 white mana, which is super useful, and it's flexible, so you can pay 4 life and pay 3 mana, generic mana, just to cast it, and it's pretty efficient. And moving on to the creatures, we have Mother of Runes. A little 1-drop puts in so much work, giving one of our creatures, probably Queen Marchesa, protection from any one color that we want. Pretty good response to removal, it's a pretty good response to blocking, it's a pretty good response to whenever we just want to swing in uncontested, deal some damage, become the Monarch again. Good for that extra bit of protection for our creatures. Grand Abolisher. We don't want any of our opponents to counter our stuff, so that's the main reason why it's in here. Also, we don't want the instant speed removal to screw with any of our attack strategies. We have Thalia Heretic Cathar. Forcing our opponent's non-basic lands and creatures to enter the battlefield tapped is a pretty good deal. Just a 3-mana first strike creature, puts in a ton of work in this type of deck. We want to slow down our opponents. We want to survive as long as possible. This isn't quite a Dirtle deck, but what we want to do is just survive as long as we possibly can to get to the late game, and I'll explain why that is later in this video, but we have to get to the late game first. Then we have Orza the Advocist. Really awesome card. During our upkeep, we can basically force our opponents to not attack us, and if they don't attack us, they get the 2+1/+1 counters on a creature of their choice, but if they don't get the 2+1/+1 counters on a creature, you basically know right away who's your enemy and who's not. That's why this card is so awesome, in addition to getting +1/+1 counters on one of your creatures as well. So right there, you know who's a threat to you, and you can just focus all your attention on them. Whoever is getting the +1/+1 counters on their creature likely doesn't care about you, or they're not threatened by you, or they don't want to be a threat to you. So it's a great indicator of who you need to really mess with. Then you have Goblin Spymaster, very underrated card. Getting 1/1 tokens for your opponents that basically say they have to attack is a great way to incentivize your opponents to attack each other, because likely we're going to have a lot of these artifacts, enchantments, all these ghostly prison type creatures that are going to keep our opponents from attacking us or make it very difficult to do so, so they might as well just attack each other instead of us. And plus, Goblin Spymaster does have first strike, so it is capable of blocking all the tokens anyway. So it's a pretty good deal. Kambal Console of Allocation. Our opponents don't want to cast non-creature spells, because if they do, we're just going to drain them of life. Very good card, just sits on the field. Our opponents, they're playing combo decks or they're playing control decks. If they have any particular combo that forces them to constantly recast a non-creature spell, this is definitely going to hurt them. Then we have Mathis Fiendseeker, one of the newer cards, a cool vampire. Basically, bounty counters are our way of letting the other players, whoever else has to deal with a problem creature, let them know that if you are able to get rid of this, we can benefit from that and draw cards together. So it's a great way to just force our opponents to get rid of something if we can't get rid of something outright. Solemn Simulacrum, good consistency, gets us a land from our deck tap, and it allows us to draw a card whenever it dies, so pretty good value. Windborn Muse, essentially a ghostly prison on a creature. Not really much else to say there. We want a ton of these sort of tax effects for our opponents whenever they attack us. Selfless Squire is basically a fog on a creature. Flash it into play, prevents a whole bunch of damage and gets all those +1/+1 counters based off of the amount of damage prevented. That is pretty funny. Can help stabilize, get back into a game. Gets you one huge, gigantic blocker. Pretty good. Michiko Kanda, Truthseeker, very similar to Phyrexian Obliterator, where basically if your opponent deals damage to you, they have to sacrifice a permanent. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. They do get to choose which permanent they sacrifice, but if you are going up against the more aggressive deck earlier in the game, and they would rather sacrifice lands and sacrifice their board state, this can definitely be your way of leveraging the game into your favor. Forcing them to sacrifice their resources early on in the game is pretty good. And then you have Archangel of Tides, essentially another ghostly prison type effect. However, it also has the added benefit of working for when we want to attack. Our opponents have to pay 1 mana for each creature that's blocking. So basically works well both on attack and defense. Pretty good combat type of card. Perfect for this deck. And then you have Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. Basically, whenever an opponent attacks us, we get a little 3/3 dude, and they can pay mana to prevent that from happening, but it is 3 mana to prevent that from happening, so depending on how many creatures they're attacking us with, we can get a ton of little tokens out there to block and pretty much stop them from going all in on us. And then we have Sun Titan, because we have a ton of smaller CMC 3 or less cards in this deck, and bringing them back is pretty solid. Even if it is just a fetch land, we can bring it back, constantly just get more mana. It's definitely good late game to have more mana, so that's what we want to do. Just a good card, helps us stabilize, and not bad, a 6/6 with Vigilance. Then we have Skyline Despot. If we are the Monarch during our upkeep, we get a 5/5 Dragon token. Very good. Also, another ETB that allows us to become the Monarch, so if we don't have Queen Marchesa out by the time we're able to cast this, we become the Monarch off of this guy, so pretty good card. Then we have Teysa, Envoy of Ghosts, as our last creature. 7 mana, protection from creatures, and Vigilance, so it's going to attack for you all day, it's going to block for you all day. And whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, you get to destroy that creature and put a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So, big incentive not to attack you. Basically what the whole deck is, guys. And then we have Enchantments. We have Authority of the Consuls. Opponent's creatures enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature an opponent controls enters the battlefield, we gain 1 life. So kind of a Soul Sister type of strategy there. Not too much. We don't have any flicker strategy. We don't have anything that can take advantage of that. But it is a great way to just give us this huge life cushion. It's just a 1-mana enchantment that sits on the field, and our opponent's creatures enter the battlefield tapped off of that. So definitely helps to slow them down. Whatever they want to do, they have to wait a turn. Blind Obedience, basically the 2-mana version of this card, its predecessor. It does have Extort, however, so you could argue that it is better when you just repeatedly extort, basically guarantee that you're going to drain some life. And it does make your opponent's creatures as well as artifacts enter the battlefield. So, pretty good. And we have Luminarch Ascension. If we can protect ourselves, if we can make it to where we're not being dealt damage repeatedly, we can get more counters on Luminarch Ascension and then just start pumping out all these 4/4 angels, these little flyers that are definitely going to help push in for more damage, help us win the game. It is a very good win con in its own right, and definitely this is not a deck that uses a ton of mana, so if we can just devote a ton of mana into Luminarch Ascension, we get a ton of little 4/4 flying angels, and it's a big threat if our opponents don't deal with it right away. And then we have Solitary Confinement. Really funny because we do get the card draw at our end step with the Monarch. Pretty much our opponents can't deal damage to us, so we stay the Monarch. It's almost like really nothing happens. We don't get as much card draw as we would because we do have to discard a card during our upkeep. But it's still hilarious though when you consider you can just sit on this, and if our opponents can't deal with it, they just can't deal with it. We should be able to stay alive for a while if this just sits on the field. And then we have Ghostly Prism, one of those cards I just mentioned before, taxes our opponents. Then we have Karmic Justice, basically makes it to where if our opponent destroys something we have, we get to retaliate, destroy a permanent they control, basically ruin their life. Then we have Aura of Silence, makes it more expensive for our opponents to cast artifacts and enchantments, 2 more to be exact, and we can sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment, so it's removal as well as attacks. So pretty good card, fits in perfectly to the deck. And we have Phyrexian Arena, just more card draw, why not? Marchesa's Decree also gives us the enter the battlefield Monarch trigger, and whenever an opponent would attack us with creatures, they have to pay 1 life for each creature that's attacking us. Basically just a slow drain there. Then we have No Mercy. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to us, destroy it. Doesn't work well with Indestructibles, but still incentivizes our opponents to not attack us. Then we have Sphere of Safety. Opponents have to pay 1 mana for each enchantment we control to attack us with each creature. So if we have a ton of enchantments on the field, our opponents are going to have to pay 1 billion mana to attack us, which, considering that's for each individual creature, that is powerful. And we have Assemble the Legion. Just going to grow this slow army of tokens during our upkeep, and if our opponents aren't careful, it's going to become too much to handle. We get 1 more counter each upkeep, and we just get that many tokens as well. It's going to get out of hand pretty quickly if our opponents can't deal with it. Now on to our Planeswalkers. We have Kaya, Ghost Assassin, and Elspeth Sun's Champion. Kaya is kind of one of those cards I could take out, but it does have some interaction. Her 0 basically allows us to exile our Marchesa, have her return the beginning of our next upkeep, and we get the Monarch trigger again. That's kind of a synergy there, but our other 2 abilities are kind of a drain for life, and force our opponents to discard cards, and we get to draw a card. So a little bit of advantage there. Not too overwhelming, but it's something. And Elspeth Sun's Champion is just pure advantage in this deck. We get some tokens that we can block with. We get a board wipe that can deal with all these gigantic creatures in the format. And we have an ult that basically allows us to win if we can also keep Elspeth alive. Get more tokens, they all get +2/+2 and have flying. Pretty good value. Now we move on to our removal and our instants overall. We have Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. Both 1 mana, they exile. They're either going to gain life or they're going to get a land from their deck. Pretty basic. Vampiric Tutor, good tutor, gets us pretty much anything we need from our deck, puts it on the top of our library. Rakdos Charm, very good utility, pretty much shuts down a lot of these combo decks that work with getting an infinite amount of tokens, or not an infinite, but you know what I mean. They get a ton of them, and if they can all deal 1 damage to their controller, you pretty much can knock that player out of the game. Exiling graveyards isn't terrible either, and destroying an artifact, I mean, it's perfect for the format. Then we have Teferi's Protection. Phasing out all of our permanents is pretty funny. Preventing all that damage, it is really just an amazing fog. Protects your stuff too, so it's multi-purposed. Then we have Chaos Warp, 3 mana, being able to deal with any permanent. Yeah, they have the potential of getting something off the top of their deck, but who cares? It's going to deal with just about anything that's a big threat right now. Anguished Unmaking, 3 mana yet again, is going to exile non-land permanents. You do have to lose 3 life to do that, but it's still pretty good. Exiling is very good removal. They have Comeuppance, very good retaliation type of card if our opponents are attacking us with creatures. That damage that would be dealt by those creatures is instead dealt to those creatures. It doesn't target, so it gets around hexproof creatures and shroud creatures. That's funny. And if our opponents would burn us with a burn spell or any other form of damage that's not a creature, that damage is prevented and instead it's dealt to them. So a very good way to then retaliate. Fun card. And then we have Return to Dust, just going to deal with our non-creature permanents that are big problems. The artifacts, enchantments, we can exile 2 if we do this at sorcery speed, but if we do it at instant speed, we can just do 1. Pretty good versatility. Then we move on to our sorceries. We have Vandal Blast, which overloaded is what you want to do here for 5 mana. We want to destroy all of our opponent's artifacts. They tend to dominate this format. Some of the best decks in this format tend to be artifact decks, so you get a ton of good value there if you're able to do that. Demonic Tutor, same thing as Vampiric Tutor, but even better. It's 2 mana at sorcery speed. You get to get whatever you want from your deck. You don't have to reveal it. And then we have one of our win cons, in addition to our Elspeth Sun's Champion, which isn't as reliable. It's not as immediate of a threat. But with Torment of Hailfire, if we're able to last into the late game, this card is just incredible in multiplayer. We basically just get to dump all of our mana into X, and our opponents have to either sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card, or they lose 3 life. So let's just say you have 12 mana. Well, you're putting 10 of it into X, so they either have to sacrifice 10 permanents or discard 10 cards, or any combination of the two to prevent any loss of life. So a lot of players are just going to take the hit in life and maybe sacrifice as few as permanents as they have to, or discard as few cards as they have to. Late game is when you want to do this. You want to grind down your opponents. Pretty much you want to do this after you board wipe, so you can force them to lose a ton of life instead of just sacrificing a ton of their non-land permanents. But it can also just be a good way to board wipe if you absolutely need it to do so. And you have Toxic Deluge. Great way to deal with indestructible creatures. That's -X/-X. Very good removal. You do lose some life depending on how big you have to go with X, but it's still worth it. Wrath of God, pretty good 4 mana. You get to just destroy all creatures. It's pretty simple. Debt to the Deathless is another win con of ours. Yet again, we're going to be dumping in a ton into X. We do have to pay the 4 mana aside from X, but it's definitely worth it because it's twice X that our opponents are losing life, and we gain that life too. So late game, this is perfect. We gain a ton of life. We get a huge cushion in the late game. That's exactly when you want it. And if we have enough mana, this is going to win us the game, just like Torment of Hailfire. So those two are just perfect for this deck. And then we, of course, have Damnation, Black Wrath of God. Disrupt Decorum is a hilarious card. It goads all of our opponent's creatures, forces them to attack each other. They're just miserable because they don't get to attack you. They're likely going to kill each other. Yet another fun card to have in the late game when our opponents are playing it safe. They're trying to stay alive. They can't attack you. That's why it's so hilarious. They're basically forced to just kill each other. Brilliant card. Then we have Austere Command. Versatile board wipe effect. It's going to deal with artifacts, enchantments, or it's going to deal with specific creatures of a CMC, whether you want to deal with lower ones or you want to deal with higher ones. Very good card. Merciless Eviction, very similar. Deals with specific card types, so if we want to exile all artifacts or all enchantments, or we want to exile all Planeswalkers, we can do that, or all creatures. And those are very good permanent types. That's just about every single one of them except for lands. It doesn't hit lands. So you're going to deal with so many problems, and the only downside is that it only exiles one of the permanent types, so it's not as versatile as Austere Command. I think Austere hits more stuff, even though it's just destroy, but it's still pretty good. Then we have Blasphemous Act. The thought of just paying 1 red mana to board wipe is pretty good, considering a lot of board wipes in this format are typically around 4 mana. So for 1 red mana, you can deal 13 damage to each creature. Yeah, there's some creatures that are going to survive that, obviously the indestructible creatures, and the creatures that happen to be gigantic, but still a good board wipe, wrath effect, whatever you want to call it in this format. Huge cost reduction for itself, and in a multiplayer game that's usually going to apply. So anyway, guys, that is the Marchesa, the Queen Marchesa deck, I should say. She is very good. This is definitely a control deck, a Pillow Fort deck, a Dirtle deck, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't say it's too much Dirtle. I did do an Aloro deck tech in the past where it was a Dirtle deck, and the whole purpose was to just stay in the late game just by board wiping over and over again. That deck had a ton of board wipes and really just slowed down the game, made it miserable. I don't think the game really slows down too much with Queen Marchesa, but it's definitely going to Pillow Fort in a way that it's going to force our opponents to attack each other, make it very unpleasant for them to have to deal with us. And we have a ton of good removal in these colors. I mean, Mardu colors are perfect for removal. We have a ton of answers, and a ton of cards that just do very similar things when it comes to taxing our opponents. That's what we want to do. Quick reminder yet again, if you are curious about my Patreon, the link will be in the description below. You could do something just like one of my awesome patrons, Ugamon, already did. You can request once a month a deck tech video or a top 10 video of your choice. And a reminder to the Patreons I have right now, if you haven't already given me your request for this month, you can definitely do that right now or anytime during this month of November that you want to. I look forward to doing more deck techs. If you want to get into this, I definitely encourage it. I like doing deck tech videos for my patrons. They're pretty fun. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off.